The streaming TV service dedicated to exploring the cutting edge of metaphysics, ancient wisdom, and the unexplained. 5,000 years of wisdom on demand. Get your first month for only 99 cents. Visit Gaia.com/Jim. That's Gaia.com/Jim to see what's happening on the largest consciousness media streaming platform in the world. Thanks, Gaia.
This is the Paranormal Podcast with Jim Harold.
Welcome to the Paranormal Podcast. I am Jim Harold and so glad to be with you once again. And I think we're going to have an interesting show for you today. First up will be Colin Schneider. He's known as the Crypto Kid, and he is an exceptionally impressive young man, and I think you'll enjoy visiting with him a bit. And then after that, we'll spend some time with Jacqueline Davio. She is the author of a book called Inspiration from Above. And here's the program. Sometimes you just meet someone who knocks the socks off of you, really impresses you. And I was at the Kent Paranormal Weekend back in, I think it was April, and a young man came up to the table, and he had this big sheath of papers, and he said, "This is some of the research I've done on cryptozoology." And when I say young man, I don't mean, 20, 25 years old. I'm talking about 16 years old. And he's already been looking into this, he says, for 5 years overall, but 3 years, that's basically what he's done other than school, I think. I'm talking about Colin Schneider. He is one of the youngest active researchers in the United States into cryptozoology and ufology, and he's only 16 years old. He has been involved intensely since he was 13, way back then, after he visited the International Cryptozoology Museum in Portland, Maine. He's a frequent attendee of conferences about the unexplained, and he lectures at numerous events around Ohio and Pennsylvania. He's also a regional representative for the Center for Fortean Zoology and host of his own Crypto Kid radio show on the WCJV Digital Broadcasting Network. And you can hear his radio show every Monday night at 8 p.m. Eastern Time at WCJV Radio. Colin Schneider, welcome to the program today.
Thanks for having me. I'm pretty excited.
You're an impressive kid. I've got to say that. I mean, really, it just amazes me. I've got to believe if anybody ever talks to you, and they'll hear throughout the show, you have to definitely be genius level. There's no question about it. So let me ask you this. How did you get interested in this? I mean, I was interested in these topics when I was a kid back in the Stone Age, but I was kind of moderately interested. I'd read here and there, but I wasn't like, I have to make this my life's work. What got you hooked? Talk to us about that.
Well, as long as I can remember, I have always had this drive and has really been excited about animals. And I used to go outside and just collect various amphibians and reptiles that I found and have them in tanks in my room, and I take care of them and study them. So I've always been really interested in zoology and how to study animals. And right around when I was about 8, I started seeing this TV show on History Channel called Monster Quest. And it just really interested me that these monsters that I heard about around the campfire were supposedly real, and these people actually went out and were trying to prove that they aren't monsters, but they're animals. So that idea that these monsters that terrified me could just be animals just excited me. And I started reading as much as I could about the subject of cryptozoology and just got really excited into it. About 5 years ago, I kind of decided, well, this is something that's really cool. I should look into it. I should look into doing it as a hobby. So I started reading. I started doing research. I was trying to get some witnesses, some people who saw Bigfoot or something around where I live. And I wasn't very successful. And it was just kind of a fleeting hobby. But as you said, when I was 13, I went to the International Cryptozoology Museum. And there I met Lauren Coleman, who was a childhood hero of mine. He was on basically every episode of Monster Quest, and I had almost all of his books. So it was really exciting to me. And I remember walking out thinking, wow, this is what I want to do for the rest of my life. I want to be a monster hunter. I want to prove someday that one or two of these things are actually animals, and they're not the monsters that everyone thinks they are, and they're just animals that we don't quite understand.
Now, it's interesting. I have to admit, and I've said this, even though I do for my Plus Club a show about cryptids, and I hold out the possibility that there is something. If I look at all the paranormal, and I put this into paranormal as well, from the sense that it's the unexplained. The paranormal is not a great word, but I use that Big Ten philosophy. But of all the different topics we cover, I tend to be a little more skeptical of things like Bigfoot and Sasquatch and so forth. Now, sea creatures, I'm a little more open to that because the sea and the ocean, it's a big place. And they're discovering new species all the time. But in terms of a land animal, I tend to be a little more skeptical. We're going to have somebody on the show in the next few weeks who is extremely skeptical. He's an actual skeptic. What do you think about the skeptics when it comes to things like Bigfoot and Sasquatch?
See, as a researcher, I try not to be a believer. I don't think I've ever said that I believe in Bigfoot. Like Jeff Meldrum says a lot. I've looked at the evidence, and I feel that the evidence is enough to show that something's going on, and it warrants more investigation. I don't know if there's a giant man-ape type creature walking around in the Pacific Northwest, but I think that it's an intriguing idea and something that definitely deserves some investigation. Now, the way I look at it is generally from more of a historical and folkloric perspective. What I'm really interested in is looking at these creatures not just as their animals waiting to be discovered, but also as their cultural and folkloric phenomenon that are just absolutely fascinating. And from that perspective, it doesn't really matter if they are indeed existing animals or not, because it's interesting whether or not they are. Because then you have the idea, if they don't exist, then you have the idea of, well, why are these archetypes everywhere, and why are these creatures so seemingly real to so many people around the world?
That's an interesting point about the archetypes. Not too long ago, we did a whole show on archetypes, but this idea across cultures, across time, you could talk about the Native American culture, you could talk about the European culture of settlers to the Americas. But this has been around a long time. This just didn't start with Roger Patterson and Gimlin in 67, did it?
No, it didn't. Almost all of these creatures that we now look at as modern monsters, if you will, they have folkloric histories back past some monsters that we associate with mythology today.
What's your favorite?
I think I have to say Bigfoot is definitely my favorite. He's the big guy. He's the most popular, and definitely the thing that I've just encountered the most with my research. But another topic that's incredibly interesting to me is definitely the chupacabra, because when I was a kid, it terrified me. So now I just have this drive to really kind of just figure out what it might be. And a lot of the explanations that I've found don't quite satisfy what, in my opinion, is the mystery concerning the chupacabra.
Yes, the chupacabra. Now, many people say that's just a mangy dog. What are your thoughts on that thesis?
Well, the Center for Fortean Zoology, one of the major interests of the group, especially the director, Jonathan Downes, is concerning the thing that most people associate with the chupacabra and the mangy dogs being what we call the Texas blue dogs. And we are of the opinion, well, most of the group is of the opinion that the creatures that people just kind of shrug off and say they're mangy dogs aren't quite. Because if you look at them, or at least most of the examples, you will see that they don't have patches of hair like creatures with mange. They are completely devoid of hair except a ridge of spiny looking hairs along their spine. Now, they definitely aren't chupacabras, and the only reason that they were associated with the chupacabra is because, one, the word chupacabra is really cool sounding, and two, when a farmer captures one or shoots one, they call up the media station, and they can't really do what was done in the 1800s and just use the "what is it" term or a "what's it," because that's not eye-catching anymore. So they grab the term chupacabra because it's very attention-grabbing and it just sounds cool. But there's never been any evidence that these creatures have been associated with the draining of blood or even livestock attacks. And the group isn't quite sure what they are. There's a strange pouch-looking thing on their stomach, and there is also on certain individuals that we think are the male specimens, there are two not pouches, but knobs on their haunches on each side that are strange looking. We don't quite know what they are, but it's been something that the group has been studying for quite a while. Now, the actual chupacabra is, at least a lot of the group, and I think this is an interesting idea, but I'm still not quite convinced. One of the ideas that has been suggested is that the creature is actually misidentifications of a porcupine, because during the slave trade back in the 1600s, when slavers arrived at Puerto Rico, during that voyage, they actually did take porcupines from Africa because they were good sources of meat, and the animals were actually fairly easy to take care of along the voyage. Now, it's been suggested that some of them escaped and survived on the island. And if you look at the original chupacabra reports, they were these quadrupedal, spiny, scary-looking creatures. There wasn't a lot of description, but the spines were very, very specific. And now it's kind of morphed into this bipedal, reptilian, yellow creature. But originally it was just this strange-looking, spiny quadruped creature with sharp teeth. And something that's interesting is while they don't attack livestock or animals, they will go to already dead specimens and suck the marrow out of their bones, and that could have been misidentified as the draining of blood. And the creatures, the livestock, could have already been killed by, other wild animals in the area.
That brings up a question, and I don't know how much research you've done on this topic. Maybe quite a bit. The idea of these cattle mutilations and what is going on with those, where you have these bloodless situations with this cattle, particularly out in the western states, and people feel that it's possibly aliens or something like that. What are your thoughts on that phenomenon? Have you looked into it at all? I know that's a little bit of a cousin to this, but you are interested in ufology, so I thought maybe this is something that you had explored at some depth.
Yes, so I'm very interested in the idea of livestock mutilations in general, and I'm actually working on a book concerning that topic, but focusing on it from the perspective of cryptid predation. So livestock, the cattle mutilations is definitely a branch of that. And the way I look at it is, for the most part, the biggest connection to UFOs that these attacks have is simply what other researchers have associated with the attacks. Yes, there have been strange lights seen around the farms, and the mutilations have popped up immediately after, but that's about the limit, and it's not all of the time. There's a good portion of these cases where there have been no UFOs seen in the area, and there's no real substantial connection, but because they resemble other livestock attacks supposedly done by whatever these UFOs are, people automatically associate them with the UFOs, extraterrestrials, whatever. Now, the way I look at it is something that's really interesting is since the late 1700s, there have also been similar livestock attacks associated with various creatures that today we call cryptids, such as large dogs that don't quite seem like they're wolves or coyotes or anything, but they're canine-looking creatures. Charles Fort, who was the original paranormal investigator, wrote extensively on numerous livestock attacks that the media at the time, the newspapers were claiming were done by dogs. But he was making the point that nobody ever saw any dogs, and the only reason that they were associated with the dogs is because there were strange dog-like footprints found around the site. But if you pull apart what people say did the attacks, then what happened actually resembles incredibly the cattle mutilations. You have very little or no blood in the corpses. You have varying levels of mutilation, including tongues being removed, sexual organs, etc., all common in cattle mutilations. And you have varying degrees of other strange phenomenon going on in the same area. Now, Charles Fort never said that he never associated them with UFOs. And a lot of people who research cattle mutilations have kind of ignored these cases, but they have been brought up a handful of times when considering ABC attacks, anomalous big cats. And that's a large topic as well. And so what I've been trying to do for the past year and a half now is research these cryptid predations and connect them to cattle mutilations, because I feel that everything's part of a larger topic that no one quite understands yet.
Well, it's a fascinating discussion. Our guest is Colin Schneider. He refers to himself as the crypto kid, but there's nothing childish about his knowledge and the research he's done. In fact, you'd never know he was a kid if he didn't tell you. So, I mean, it's really, sometimes these kind of things are kind of a novelty and so forth, but there's no novelty to it. Colin is a researcher, and he's got a lot of fascinating information, and we're going to talk with him more right after this. The Paranormal Podcast is brought to you by Gaia, the streaming TV service dedicated to exploring the cutting edge of metaphysics, ancient wisdom, and the unexplained. And keep listening, because I'm going to tell you once again how you can get your first month for only 99 cents. Now, Gaia is the streaming service not dedicated to comedy or to dramatic kind of series, but it's dedicated to the kind of things that we love, the Fortean, the paranormal, the supernatural, the metaphysical, the mysteries of life. And the great thing is that no matter where you're at, no matter where you're hearing me, you can get Gaia on all of your devices. There's Apple TV, your iPhone, your Roku, your iPad, your Chromecast, your Android device, your Fire TV, your computer. If you're listening to my voice, you can watch Gaia. Now, there's a ton of video on the internet, but it's really a mixed bag. But not so at Gaia. They have their own original productions, which are top-notch quality, and then they go out and they find the best producers and the best content, and they curate it, and they bring it to you as part of their service, which is the best service and really the only service of its type that I know of. I love Gaia, and I think that you will also. And another thing that's great about them is they don't kind of just put a bunch of content up there and sit on their laurels. They are rolling out new things every day. every week they send me an update and say, Jim, here's the new stuff. And it's just kind of tough keeping up with them. Now, they have a free preview up of a new show that I'm very interested in. It's called Hollywood Decoded. It's by Jay Dyer and Jay Widener. And Jay Widener's been a guest on our shows before, talking about Stanley Kubrick and some of his movies. But anyway, this show is based on the question, is there a deeper, more esoteric meaning to the popular movies that we all love? Jay and Jay will delve into the intricacies of the symbolism hidden in blockbuster films to reveal the secret messages hiding in plain sight. And they have a preview up right now on Gaia. Also, Wisdom Teachings with David Wilcock is back. The most recent episode is on ancient prophecies of extraterrestrials. Or you might want to check out Cosmic Disclosure, also hosted by David Wilcock with his co-host Corey Good. And they interview David Adair, the original Rocket Man. And there's so much more. Now, the cool thing is that you can kind of sample some of this in terms of Gaia content. Go over to Gaia.com/Jim. That's GAIA.com/Jim. And watch some of the programs I've picked over there and see what you think. I think that you're gonna really enjoy it. It's like a video buffet for the topics we love. And once you've gone to Gaia.com/Jim, one other thing I'd like you to do, there's a little red button. It says sign up. Click on it. Sign up and get your first month for only 99 cents. And you're going to say, why didn't I listen to Jim months ago? But better late than never. You don't want to miss out on this. So go over to Gaia.com/Jim to see what's happening on the largest consciousness media streaming platform in the world. Thanks, Gaia. We're back on the Paranormal Podcast with Colin Schneider. He is the crypto kid and a very impressive young man with a lot to say about the topic of cryptozoology. Now, Colin, one of the big questions, and this almost comes out every time you talk to somebody interested in Bigfoot, for example, is why haven't we found a body? On one side, you have the true believers saying, well, you know, they carry their dead away and nature takes care of the bodies, and that's why we've never found anything. And then I've heard skeptics say, well, that's true to an extent. There's a kernel of truth to that, but that's a little bit of a cop-out, because eventually you would find something that would be identifiable. Where do you come down on that?
I'm not quite sure. I agree with the skeptics that it's a lot of the explanations that people come up with don't quite fit or don't quite explain everything, and they aren't plausible to a point. But I also think that there is something going on, but I don't know. I try as hard as I can to avoid making claims or avoid forming opinions on varying things. I just kind of go where the evidence takes me. Now, I do think that something is going on that can't quite be explained by people misidentifying bears or seeing something that their brain associates with Bigfoot in the woods that isn't quite so. But I also don't think that it's necessary. I don't think that it necessarily has to be an unidentified man-like ape walking around in the woods. I think it's a possibility, and I think it's honestly, if I had to choose a cryptid to definitely exist and be proven right now, I would choose Bigfoot in a heartbeat. I want Bigfoot to be a flesh and blood creature, but honestly, I don't know. And I don't think that really either side is right all the time. And I try to just stay as objective as I can.
I agree with you 100%. I just had a email exchange with a skeptic who's going to be on the show, and I basically said to him, look, I believe that sometimes paranormal things happen. I believe it's a reality. Do I believe everything that's claimed to be supernatural or paranormal or whatever it might be is? No, I don't. Now, this is a little different if we're talking about Bigfoot as an animal, because if Bigfoot is truly an animal, it's not really paranormal per se. It certainly falls into the Fortean category, which we kind of cover as well here. Now, so you sound like you certainly have a bit of skepticism about the phenomenon. I think that's understandable. But my question would be, you still say you think it's worthy of research. There's some interesting reports. So if you had to come down to one case that really says, Colin, you got to keep an open mind on this because this case really is amazing, what would that case be?
Well, most people would probably say something along the lines of the Patterson film.
Right.
But honestly, for me, I think it's the Bossberg tracks. Now, I can't quite remember what year, but Bossberg, Washington, some naturalists were out in the winter and they found a line of, I think, somewhere around 1,000 tracks from the road going into a forest. And at one point, the tracks actually step over a fence, and there was yellow-looking snow around the area as well, and they assumed that it was urine. But at the time, there was no real reason for them to collect that because there wasn't any DNA testing at the time, or it was in its very, very early stages. So, but what's really interesting about that case is one foot looked basically like every other Bigfoot track, but the other one was mangled and it was deformed, and that's why the case is often called the Bossberg cripple. What's really interesting is Jeff Meldrum has looked into these tracks extensively, and he actually devised where he thinks the anatomy of the foot would be, where the bone structure would be. And it's very fascinating to me. And he has said several times that if it is a fake, it is the best fake, the best footprint fake ever. And I don't know. I've always thought they were fascinating. And the first time I heard about the tracks, I was actually at the Cryptozoology Museum that got me really into the subject. So it's just always been something that's fascinated me, and I've pointed to as one of the greatest pieces of evidence we have.
Now, we've talked mainly about land-based creatures. Do you do any research on water-based creatures?
Some. I think it's a topic that is definitely interesting, and looking back into the history of cryptozoology, for quite a while it was a topic that was even bigger than Bigfoot. There were, like, in the 50s and 60s, a lot of people associated with the field of cryptozoology were looking into, lake monsters and sea serpents, and they were really big in the media. But after the Patterson film and the enormous wave of sightings in the 70s, lake monsters and sea serpents have kind of taken a back seat to, Bigfoot and later other popular creatures, like the chupacabra. I think they're interesting, but I am not the biggest fan of, swimming and boating. So I kind of don't do as much research into those as other people. I know a good friend of mine, Tyler Hauk, who is another teenager who's into the field, does a lot concerning lake monsters. So generally, whenever I find some interesting report, I kind of pass it on to him. I'm much happier just being on land looking into this stuff.
Now, let me ask you this, because, and you've talked about this, the idea of Bigfoot, for example, being an animal. And some people believe that there's some mystical piece to this. Stan Gordon, who you mentioned right on your website, and we'll certainly let you promote where that's at. You talk about Stan Gordon, who's done some really interesting work on the coincidence of Bigfoot and UFOs, Bigfoot sightings and UFOs. So do you think Bigfoot and similar cryptids are simply animals, or do you think that maybe we are talking about some kind of supernatural or otherworldly link?
I'm not sure. When I talk cryptids, I'm talking cryptozoology, which inherently is simply just the examination of these phenomenon as if they are animals just waiting to be identified. But I do think that there is some kind of connection between certain examples and, UFOs or various supernatural phenomenon. I'm not sure. I mean, Stan Gordon is a major influence on what I do. He's helped me at varying stages, and he's been an enormous mentor and friend of mine. And so I respect his work, and because he's researched so extensively into, Bigfoot UFOs, the connection between them and some of this other stranger aspects of the fields, I do think that there is a lot of credibility and plausibility to a lot of what's going on. I just trying to stay objective. I don't know, and I try to avoid saying, well, since a couple of these things have happened in the same place in the same time, and several people have said they've seen these things together, that automatically means everything's supernatural, everything is connected to UFOs. I'm not sure. I think that I've said it before on other interviews and on my show several times. I think that all of these things are incredibly interesting, and I think that they should be investigated, and I think that those who are investigating them are doing it very well. And I always make sure that I keep these type of things in mind when I'm doing my own research.
Now, here's a question for you, and this relates to your age. Some people may be listening to this, maybe somebody on the skeptical side, and say, he's going to grow out of this. He's going to realize how silly all this is and probably become a real scientist. If somebody's out there thinking that, what are your thoughts?
Well, I'm fascinated by science. I love science of every sort, and I'm always reading about new discoveries going on concerning space and physics. So it's something that's always fascinated me. But I've always also been interested in mysteries and, these monsters and paranormal things. And after I go to college, I am planning on being a zoologist. I want to work with a zoo and, take care of these animals and study them and learn as much as I can about these animals. I'm specifically interested in primatology. But I think that cryptozoology will always be something that I'm involved in. And it's just too interesting and exciting to me to leave it alone. Even if one day I do, start taking the side of a more skeptical position, I think I'll always be at least involved in it in some way. Right now, I can't really tell my future, but I do know as a fact that I will be working with this field when I'm 50, 60, as I get older.
Well, we certainly hope so, because you have a lot to contribute. Now, what is maybe one of the cases that maybe people haven't heard that you think, now it could be Bigfoot, it could be Chupacabra, it could be any cryptid, a case that people maybe aren't familiar with that you think, wow, now that's a cool case. Is there one that comes to mind?
Well, concerning the cryptid mutilations, as I said, I've done a lot of research concerning these phenomenon. And so I've been going around for the past year and a half talking about these cases. So some of your listeners, if they have heard me talk about it, they may be familiar. But there is a case that is generally put aside or, less known unless you're a researcher into some of these specific topics that it's connected to. I'm talking, of course, about the Beast of Bladenborough, case, Bladenboro, North Carolina, December of 1953 through January of 1954. Now, the town of Bladenboro at the time was a smaller mill town. There was an area that was had some factories and mills, and it was bordering a swamp. And at the very end of December, the townspeople started noticing that there were dogs that were being found, killed. Their skulls had been crushed, their tongues had been ripped out, and their brains had been eaten, and they had been drained of blood. Oftentimes very, very brutal. Oftentimes the corpses would be mangled as if whatever is doing this has claws that it's slashing the animals as it's doing these terrible things to them. And what's really interesting is over the course of close to 3.5 weeks, a total of, I think, 12 dogs were killed in this fashion. Several sheep, a handful of geese, and varying odds and ends of other livestock and domestic animals. During that time, there were actually several Black Panther type creatures seen in the vicinity. Several of the attacks were actually, when the bodies were found, those who found it actually had to chase off a panther-like creature away from the corpse. What's really interesting is when you look at the case and you look at the attacks that were done, it has all the hallmarks of both other cryptid predations and a lot of similarities concerning cattle mutilations. You have the blood draining. You have the tongues being removed. Sometimes there were 1 or 2 ears that were removed. The brains. So it's really interesting to me because it is very similar to the cattle mutilations and has a lot of hallmarks concerning other cryptid predations. Now, the panthers got a lot of people riled up, and almost every night during these attacks, there were anywhere from 500 to 1,000 local hunters from towns all around North Carolina that came to Bladenboro trying to catch and kill one of these panthers. Eventually, a bobcat was shot, and the attacks started dying down, but there were several afterwards. And if you look at these, the way these animals were attacking, it doesn't fit the patterns of a panther. It doesn't fit the patterns of a bobcat, and it doesn't fit the patterns of any other known any other known predator, both in the area and that would plausibly, even though it's exotic, plausibly also be in the area. So I think it's a fascinating case, and I've written about it in several different magazines, and I'm working on another extensive examination for the Center for Fortean Zoology's journal, Animals and Men.
Fascinating stuff and fascinating discussion with Colin Schneider, the Crypto Kid. We were so glad that we had some time to spend with him. Colin, where can people find all your information, and where can they find the radio show, and what will they expect when they tune in?
So my radio show, The Crypto Kid, is on WCJV Radio. You can find it at WCJVradio.com. And I bring on every week a new groundbreaking guest in the field of cryptozoology to talk about the stranger side or the more obscure side of the field. And we don't just talk about Bigfoot. We don't just talk about, the Patterson-Gimlin films anniversary is coming up. So we don't just talk about things that everybody knows about. We don't just sit there and rehash all these things about the Patterson-Gimlin film or, other cases that everyone knows about. We try to talk about something new every week and really get people learning and excited and understanding the field, while also making it interesting for younger people my age, because I'm really trying to get other teens interested in this subject, because we are the next generation, and right now there's only a handful of us. So you can also find me online at paranorm101.blogspot.com. That's my blog. I try to post at least once a month. A lot of the times it's just checking up with what I've been doing. I try to post some interesting newspaper articles that I found in my research. It's a good way to keep up with what I'm working on. And I will be doing several different conferences coming up, such as the Albert Witch Festival, where I'm the keynote speaker, and that is in Columbia, PA, and that will be October 14th.
A young man wise beyond his years, and I expect that we're going to hear much more from him. He is the Crypto Kid, Colin Schneider. Colin, thank you for joining us today.
Thanks for having me on. I had a great time.
Well, I'm sure whatever that young man decides to do in life, he'll be quite successful at. Very impressive. Next up, Jacqueline Davio on Inspiration from Above. Our guest today has confronted something that I hope none of you ever have to or ever have had to confront, and I certainly hope it's something I never have to confront, because it is a tragedy. But she has taken it and gotten, or it's hard to say how to put this, but she has accentuated the positive, because there has been some positive and some things that have happened that are very enlightening. And I'm talking about our guest today, Jacqueline Davio. And she has written the book, Inspiration from Above, My Son Guides Me from the Afterlife. And we met at the Kent Paranormal Weekend, and so glad to have her on the show and to talk about her experiences with her son from above. Jacqueline, welcome to the program tonight.
Thank you very much.
Now, let's start before all of this happened. Your relation to the supernatural, to the paranormal, I guess your experiences started at a young age.
Yeah, they did. Yeah, my first experience was actually pretty divine in nature. I saw angels and Jesus. I thought it was Jesus I saw, and it was very beautiful. But at the time, I was a small child, so it was frightening to me. So I kind of ran away from it. But I've always had experiences growing up. And before anything did happen to my son, I worked as a paranormal investigator, which I still do today. So I've always had a fascination with the afterlife, and I've always known that we go on after this. So I've always had a drive to prove it to other people we do. So after my son passed away, I kind of took notice of all the signals he's given me and the messages I've received. So,
again, my sympathies on your son. As a parent of two is just, almost inconceivable.
Yeah.
So, again, my sympathies, but you have really had some beautiful things happen as a result. Of course, you'd love to have him back, but tell us about in life, who was your son? Tell us about your son.
Mario, his first name was Christopher, but we all called him by his middle name, Mario. He was, I had him at a very young age, so me and him grew up almost like best friends. We were so close. He was extremely intelligent. He was like a physics tutor in college. He was an awesome big brother. He was such a mentor to them, his younger two brothers. And he went away to Bowling Green University in Ohio, and he was going for construction management, and he was going to continue on to become an architect down the road.
And tell us, you don't have to go in great detail, but tell us what happened a few years back.
It was September 30th, 2015, and he was coming home. He used to always come home on the weekends to spend time with his brothers instead of going to the parties and things, which was unusual in itself, but that's how he was. And he was pulling out of a gas station out in Bowling Green, and he was hit by a semi-truck and killed instantly.
Horrible. Just very sad. So when this happened, of course, your state of mind, I think in the book you said you didn't even kind of know where you were at or what happened. It all just flew by so quickly.
Yeah, I was on autopilot for sure.
And that's totally understandable. But did you start thinking about contact? Did that even cross your mind initially?
No, I was just so grief stricken at the time. It was weeks had gone by and I was not eating or sleeping, or I just couldn't do daily functions like normal people do. There was this one night in particular that everyone was sleeping. It was past the time, friends and family stopped coming over every day to check on me. So it was at the point that I was finally by myself, and it just really hit me like a tidal wave at that moment. And, I fell to my knees one night and I was just by myself, just like 2-3 in the morning. And I was just like, God, please take me. I can't do this anymore. And that's the night I heard, it sounded like a voice came from within me. It wasn't around me, but it came from inside of me, and it said, I am with you. It was a very stern voice. It was like, I am here. It didn't scare me, but I'm like, it stopped, made me pause for a minute. I'm like, what? Who's with me? I thought maybe I was losing it for a minute. But then I heard the voice again. And I don't remember getting off the floor and going to bed, but that's like the first night I slept in a long time, and I slept soundly. And I woke up the next morning and I'm like, okay, I got to figure out how to do this. I got 2 other boys to take care of. I got to figure out how to function again. And that's when I started practicing meditation. It was actually that very next day.
And how do you, most of us have lost somebody close to us. A lot of people haven't lost a child, which is kind of the ultimate loss. Right. But there's this desire to want to make contact. And it's like, then it becomes, to me, it would be very difficult to tell if this is me like reading into things or this is really a communication. How did you tell that the communication was really happening?
You could tell by the way you feel. My feelings went from grief to excitement. I was excited. Each morning I woke up, I'm like, I'm going one day closer to seeing him again. Instead of thinking, oh my God, I have to live another day without him. I kind of switched my perspective around completely on that. Cause I know I'm going to see him again. I absolutely know that for a fact, 100%. That's the big reason why I shared my story. So everyone else knows, you lost your father, your husband, your grandmother, anyone. You will see them again. And they are around us, and they do give us their little signals all the time. And I think the more that you believe in it, the more you'll see, and the more they'll give us. And it's a gift everyone can obtain. I'm not a psychic, I'm not a medium, nothing like that. I pay attention.
Now, your son was interested in construction. And he had a dream about building buildings in the sky.
Sky City, yeah. That was that's actually even in his obituary. He says he thought beyond this realm almost, and he was so young and just so bright. He says at one time, in the near future, we're going to become so overpopulated in the world that we're going to have to actually have cities above ground. So him and his best friend Jeremiah, they started doing all these drawings and animations of what they called Sky City. That was like his ultimate goal in life, to build the first Sky City.
So it's interesting because doesn't that play into some of the signs?
Yeah, it does. Definitely. It does. And then Sky City, heaven, it's synchronicities everywhere.
And he does something called, for you say sky art?
Yeah. Yes. And actually, all of our loved ones do this. You just think that the sky is their canvas. They can manipulate things how they will. So I'm sure people have seen things in the sky that's brought up a fond memory or a loved one, or maybe you've seen a heart in the sky or something that looks like angel wings, or I always see mini rainbows, like just fractions of rainbows in the sky. I see those all the time.
So does he just do these for you spontaneously, or do you ask him for a sign? How does that work?
No, it seems that I get the most signs when I'm under stress, because I still grieve him quite a bit. So it seems like whenever I'm missing him the most, he knows, and he knows how to cheer me up.
Well, it's a very touching discussion. The book is Inspiration from Above. My Son Guides Me from the Afterlife. Our guest is Jacqueline Devio, and we're going to be back and talk more about it on the Paranormal Podcast. Hey, everybody. I just wanted to take a moment to tell you about my new app. It's called Jim Harold Spooky Studio. It is available currently on Apple and on Android, and I think you're going to like it. So far, I think our average on iTunes and the Apple App Store is 5.0. On Android, it is 4.9. They're a little tougher audience there, I guess, but I'll take a 4.9. That's pretty good. And it's really a very cool app. Now, certainly you can stay subscribed in Apple Podcasts and all the other places if you prefer those. But if you'd like to have an app where you can get access to all of my free shows, you can go over to one of those app stores, the Apple App Store or the Android App Store, and simply search for Jim Harold or Jim Harold Spooky Studio. This is an entirely new app that replaces the old app. If you have the old app, get that off of your phone and get this new one. It is much, much better. And a plus is that if you are a Plus Club member, you can actually get very easy access to all of my shows. Now, currently where we are with the Plus Club, just to explain to everyone, is that's where you can get all the back catalog going back to 2005 and so forth. We're moving people over from the old system to the new system. So unless you're currently a member to the old site, we're kind of holding off on new registrations on that. Now, once that opens up, believe me, you will hear about it. And it's going to be a much better Plus experience. But for now, we're really focusing on moving the existing members over and taking care of them first, of course. And then we'll open it up to everybody probably late in August, early September. And that'll be a great time to join, because now you have this great new app where you can get everything. But don't let that stop you for now. For the free shows, go over and get Jim Harold Spooky Studio on the Apple App Store or the Android App Store. And I think you'll like it. Thanks. We're back on the Paranormal Podcast. Our guest is Jacqueline Devio. She is the author of the book Inspiration from Above. My Son Guides Me from the Afterlife. Now, Jacqueline, I know there are stages of grief, and certainly I don't think that this would be something anybody would ever get over, quote, get over. However, it's probably different than it was when it was fresh and it had just happened. Yeah. So what if someone out there is listening and they've dealt with the loss of a very close person, a spouse, a sibling, God forbid, a child? What would you say to them? Because, you know, it's been a couple of years and God knows it's still very, very difficult, I'm sure. But what would you say to somebody at that initial stage of grief and what they can look for as hope?
Well, you can't cheat grief, unfortunately. It's something that you do have to acknowledge the emotions. The more you run from it or hide it, or, you know, doctors are so quick to medicate you, it's going to come back. So you just deal with it as it comes. You know, it's normal. The waves of emotion are very normal. The hope, you know, just every morning you get up. That's the way I tell myself all the time. Every day I get up, I'm closer to going home, because I consider our next dimension our real home. I think that when we're here, we have so many limitations. And like from what my son has shown me, from where he is, we're limitless. So they are happy and they want us to be happy. Just getting to that point is the hard part for us, because we're the ones that are left behind. What
is one of your favorite stories, Mario, and contact that he had with you, a dramatic example or one specifically close to you?
Oh, geez, there's so many of them. You know, a lot of the visions I have. Well, maybe first I should say how I have my visions of him. I go into a state of meditation. I just completely clear my mind, my thoughts, you know, and you're almost in that in between sleep mode, wake asleep. So your mind's completely clear. Your conscious mind is kind of slowing down. Your unconscious is waking up. and then I just really pay attention to what I see when he shows me. The hardest part at first is trusting what you see. So many people want to say, oh, it's my imagination. You have to trust how you feel. If something feels, if it fills your heart with joy and happiness, it's real. You can't just make that up. Some of the fondest stories or things he's shown me are actually, it's just like proof that he's been around. Like, for instance, we are at my sister's house. This is last year. We were at my sister's house for my mom's birthday, and we were all swimming in the swimming pool.
Right.
And my youngest son, Julian, he took my hair clip, and his hair is a little longer for a boy, and he pulled his hair back in a hair clip, and he just looked really goofy. So it was like a week later, I went into that meditative state, and I had a vision of Mario, and he pulled his hair back in a hair clip like that, and he started giggling his funny laugh, and he says, "What's this about?" So it just made me know, like, he was there with us. We were there celebrating my mom's birthday, so he was the first grandchild, so of course he was there.
And you had a story about going to a football game in Denver, and that was pretty dramatic.
Yeah. That was the December after he passed away. It was early December, and my sister lives out in Denver, so she flew me out there. And we went to my brother-in-law took me to a Denver Broncos game against the Oakland Raiders because I'm a huge Broncos fan. And that day all came and gone and everything. And then this is what happened. Okay, I'm sorry, I had to remember for a second. We were at the Broncos game, and they have something called the Jumbotron, which is a huge scoreboard. And, they have a huge TV there. And that they were just panning the crowd like they do at any sports event. And I saw Mario standing there. And he had a number 7 shirt on. And he was cheering and having a good old time. I'm like, holy crap, So I turned to my brother-in-law. I'm like, who's number 7 on the Broncos? And at the
that
time,
was John, but it was John Elway.
Yeah. Oh, no, I'm sorry. It was number 13.
Oh, okay.
It was number 13. I apologize. So it was number 13. And I said, who's number 13 on the Denver Broncos? And he says, nobody. Nobody's 13. And so we're just racking our head the whole time. But I saw my son in the crowd wearing a Broncos shirt cheering.
Wow.
Yeah. And then later on in that week, me and my sister went to the Indian Hot Springs, which is a real spiritual getaway type place. And we were just soaking in the spring water. It's really hot, and I went to a state where I saw him again, and I saw him standing in the middle of the football field. But it was only he and I were alone on the field. And he's like, "You did it, Mom. You can see me. You can see me." And as he was cheering again, and he was pointing to the screen that I saw him on a few days prior.
Now, have you had any communication with him or any input on what the afterlife is like?
He loves it. And actually, he said, I did ask him, I'm like, Mario, what is heaven like? And he says, well, it depends on who you ask, because everyone gets to make their own heaven. It's whatever, what I love here is not what someone across the world loves. So he made it like whatever you desire, whatever you think you can manifest for yourself.
Huh. Interesting.
And he's gone into like the power of thought here on our realm too. Positive thoughts equal positive outcomes and vice versa. If you always have a negative mind frame, then things aren't going to go too well for you.
I agree. And you just see that time and time again. People who think positively, good things tend to happen. And when you don't think as positively, and that's not to say, sometimes I worry about that because I think people assume that if something bad happens to you, that you did something wrong and you were negative. Right. I don't believe that. I personally just believe it's like a tendency. You know what I'm saying? It's like if you're more positive, things tend to be more positive. If you're more negative, they tend to be more negative. But right. Everybody has bad things happen to them. I don't care how positive you are. Right. So for other people, what do you want this book and your experience to mean for other people?
Well, I wanted it to open their eyes up to the possibilities, that maybe the dream they had was true. Maybe they thought they had while they were drifting off to sleep of their loved one was true. Maybe these messages are true. Because how many people have you heard who have dreams that their loved one came to them and said, I'm okay. It's all right. Go on with your life. I want you to be happy. I'm good. So, and people to be open to signs. I mean, I think that our loved ones, they always come to us, but I believe firmly that they can't really cross the line of free will and just be like, hey, I'm here. So I think they do give us little signs, like the cardinals we'll see in the windows when maybe we're grieving somebody. The scent, maybe you'll smell grandpa's pipe. Maybe you'll smell grandma's cooking. It just goes on and on. Another personal favorite one of mine is a dime. Mario likes to leave me dimes all the time. And actually, while we were at the Kent stage, he put one on the stage for Todd when he was up there.
I think I was on the stage when that happened. I think I might have been. I think I might because I was doing the moderation or something, and I remember somebody finding change. So I may have been on the stage at that time. I can't. I'm not sure if that was something else, but I think I might have been there.
It was just really significant though, because the day before I was out, I always feed the cardinals because I love when the cardinals come around. So I was feeding the birds in the middle of the yard, just about bird food. A dime falls from the sky from nowhere, right in front of me, heads up.
Yeah, that is so neat. That is so neat.
And then,
go ahead.
And then Todd found one a couple of days later on the stage. So I was like, and then Laura Lynn was like, "Oh yeah, your son's here."
and we should tell people explain who Todd is and his relation to the paranormal.
Well, Todd is, I would like to say, the best investigator in Ohio. He trained me well, and then I think I grew on him because now he's my spouse.
There you go. There you go. There you go. And at the end of our discussion here, we'll be able to let you know where you can find out more about Todd Shalat and the group and so forth. So I mean, this is an ongoing communication. I mean, you talk to him on a regular basis.
Yeah, it is. Actually, I just was talking to my publisher before you called. I'm working on part 2 of the book. It's called Remembering Heaven. It's just a continuation of the book. Because each book of Inspiration from Above is a different vision I've had. And it's a very visual book. It's, it just describes the landscape, scenery, smells, music that I'm hearing, and what others look like on the other side. They look so alive. They look vibrant. They're beautiful. They're so much better than we are.
Well, I have heard this, and maybe you know from your investigations, people report if they see, quote, ghosts or spirits or those kind of things, that they will appear, somebody who passes who is very ill, and they will see them in the prime of life. They won't see them ill. So that seems to be a recurring theme. It
does, for sure. We're made of energy. Energy doesn't die. It moves elsewhere. Maybe some people call it heaven, a different dimension, whatever it is, it's a better place, whatever your belief system is. It's like here. It's just, if Earth is a negative, then heaven is a full-blown portrait, so like we have the black and white version here. So when we cross over, we get the full view and perspective of what it really is.
Now, you were a paranormal investigator and interested in all of this and had experiences before this happened.
Yes.
But this takes it to a different level, I would assume. Tell us how it's changed your perspective on all of this, the supernatural, the paranormal, all of these things.
I'm definitely a lot more spiritual now. I think spirituality has played a huge role in my life. My views are different than many people, and I understand that. When I put my book out, I knew I was kind of waiting to get backhanded for a few things I've said in there. But when I investigate now, I feel like I have more meaningful questions. Just even doing EVP sessions instead of just like, "What's your name? Why are you here?" I ask more questions like, "What is the other side like? Do you feel better now? Are you free?" Things I think more profound questions, and I think we get more responses that way as well. I just want to learn from them. And I make that clear. I just really want to learn. So we always try different experiments. We're always looking for a different way to investigate, but we just really do want to learn.
Now, let me ask you this. Have other members of your family had communications with Mario?
Yes, my mom and both my sisters have, and his brothers.
And what kind of things have happened to them?
Austin is my middle son. So he and Mario, they were best. They were amazing growing up together. All three of them really were. It was about a week after Mario passed away. Austin had a dream, and Austin said he had a dream. He was sitting on the couch, and Mario looked younger than him, which Mario's actually 5 years older than him. But Mario walked up to him and said, "I'm proud of you," and gave him a white rose. And ever since Austin had that dream, it just comforted him, and he knew something was going on. He knows his brother's with him all the time.
Here's a question for you, and we kind of covered this a little bit before, but I'll give you a personal experience. My mom passed. Now, I've not had any of these types of signs you're talking about. Nothing is dramatic. But I know that at least on one occasion, I thought that I was getting communication kind of like when you hear a voice in your mind. I wasn't hearing her audibly. But then, of course, I've been doing these shows for 12 years, but still the doubter still comes in and says, "Jim, that's just you." Mm-hmm. Kind of projecting what you think she would say in this situation.
That's also your ego talking you out of it.
Well, that's my question. How do you know the difference?
First, I think we have to throw away all expectations of what they can do and what they can't do, because they have more limits than we do. They can communicate however they want. I mean, they use electronics, mind, whatever they want. So I would really start paying attention to those thoughts you're getting, and I would start writing them down. I mean, that's how my whole journey started, was just writing down these little things that happen. And then I put all these pieces together like a puzzle, and I got the whole picture. And I'm still working on that puzzle, of course, but we have to trust what we hear. Well, if we keep ignoring it, they're not going to keep talking to us.
Interesting point. You talked about meditation. What role has meditation played in all of this? Meditation
plays a huge part in it. I just think the world, we've all become so adapted to electronics, our smartphones, our TVs, that we don't pay attention to our own intuition and our own sixth sense that we're all born with. I just think we are deprogrammed as we grow into adulthood. Don't believe that. That's just a make-believe friend. So when you go into meditation, you're just paying attention to your own self and what's inside of you and what's given to you. So meditation is probably one of the oldest techniques in civilization, yet so many people don't utilize it. And I think the more people that utilize it, they're going to discover more about themselves and what's offered to them.
Now, when people talk about communicating with the spirits and those types of things, I think particularly today with all the TV shows and everything, there's a thought that you've got to go out. Well, I was going to say Radio Shack, but it doesn't exist anymore. But you have to go to the internet equivalent and buy various meters and recorders and all of that. That doesn't seem to have been your experience in this case with your son.
No, I've never used any equipment or anything like that to try to communicate with him. Actually, I never try to communicate with him at all. I thought it would be disrespectful, if that makes sense to you. It's kind of I wanted to let him rest in peace, and that it's hard to explain. But
now it's understandable, though. I know exactly what you're saying.
He came to me. I think he saved me in many ways. He saw how I was a wreck. I think with everything he's shown me, he put me back to pieces. So I think the first step is to believing it's a possibility. If you truly believe it's a possibility, then it can be. Then your mind is open to it.
I think that's important too. I mean, if you keep, it's kind of like the manifestation thing you were talking about. If you keep saying it's not possible, it's not possible, it's not possible,
that's right.
then it's, I'm not going to say it's impossible, but it would seem to me it'd be a heck of a lot less likely.
Right. It's true.
So if you had one message for some out there, and we talked about this again, but I really think this is an important piece of what you do, and I think you do too. That's why I'm kind of bringing it back up. One message for someone who is in deep grief right now.
Oh, it's someone that's in deep grief. The messages, it has to come to them personally. I mean, but the one thing I can tell you, 100%, I know that there is life after death. We do go on, and we all will be together again, and that's something to look forward to. So if that's even just the light at the end of the tunnel for you, you have something to look forward to. Don't worry about death. Death is just a transition. We just move from this dimension to the next. And the next dimension is much better than this one.
So where can people go and find the book and find more information about what you're doing?
Okay, I have an author page on Facebook. It's at author Davieu, Davieau. That's just my author page. It has my books and things on there. Inspiration from Above is on Kindle, Amazon, and at Barnes & Noble.
And we should mention Tri-C Ghost Hunters. Where can people check Tri-C Ghost Hunters out?
Tri-C Ghost Hunters, tcghohio.org.
There you go.
And then Tri-C Ghost Hunters is on Facebook as well.
Very good.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I thank you very much. It takes a lot of courage to come out with a work like this, something so personal, so close. And I think some people would shy away from that, and to some extent, understandably so. I could understand why you wouldn't want to.
I almost did.
Yeah.
I almost did not publish this book.
Yeah.
But I was like, what can happen? Worse in my life has already happened. What worse can happen? So, I guess I've overcome a lot of fears through this tragedy, and I just gotta live life to the fullest. That's what my son would want. He want me to live life to the fullest. And if sharing my full truth is living life to the fullest, I'm gonna keep on doing it.
Excellent. Our guest has been Jacqueline Davieu. The book is Inspiration from Above. My Son Guides Me from the Afterlife. Thank you for sharing this very personal story with us today.
Thank you.
Well, certainly a lot to think about, and we thank you so much for tuning in to the Paranormal Podcast. We hope you will stick with us through all of these changes. I have a very interesting show coming next week about some current events in paranormal news. I'll say no more, but I think you'll find it absolutely fascinating, and I can't wait to speak with this guest and find out what he's discovering and what he's hearing out there. Interesting stuff. We'll talk to you next time on the Paranormal Podcast, and stay tuned and stay spooky. Bye-bye, everybody. Now for the legal disclaimer. We do not accept money from publishers or content producers in exchange for interviews. However, as with most media outlets, in the majority of cases, we do receive complimentary copies of books and DVDs that we feature on our podcasts. Your purchases of books, DVDs, and other items via our Amazon.com links benefit Jim Harold and JimHarold.com and help us continue our programming. The sponsor messages you hear on the programs are paid endorsements, although we really do like them. For the full disclaimer, go to JimHarold.com, and thanks for listening.